Indirect touch input systems are systems where input and output surfaces do not overlap. And they have been used for decades in the form of touchpads or graphic tablets. And indirectness has further been recognized as one factor able to mitigate shortcomings of direct touch interaction. It is used, for example, to counter arm fatigue with vertical displays, to cover large distances, to enable eyes-free interaction, and to improve precision by avoiding finger occlusion. Our goal was to contribute to the understanding of indirect touch input systems, and we were inspired by findings related to embodied cognition, a field that assumes that many features of the human cognition are shaped by aspects of the body beyond the brain. In this regard, the influence of cues and movements provided by different input techniques on spatial cognition has been studied by Tan, who compared mouse and touch input for a vertical display, and Yetter, who compared mouse and touch input for a tabletop display. As in their studies, participants first developed a mental representation of a 2D space, either by dragging objects onto specified positions or by searching items within a 2D space using 2D panning operations. Then in a second step, participants were asked to recall the item positions by placing the items as accurately as possible inside the space. And the spatial memory performance was then measured as the mean distance between the original and the recalled item location. Both studies report that with direct touch input, the spatial memory performance was significantly better than with mouse input, and Yetter also observed an improved navigation performance for direct touch input. As indirect touch input mixes the indirectness of the input with the cues and movements provided by touch interaction, we were interested how the touch indirectness affects navigation performance and spatial memory performance in a 2D panning task compared to direct touch, and further how a decreased input surface size in the indirect touch condition will affect these two measures. To answer these questions, we conducted a study that was based on the experiment reported by Yetter and also contained two tasks, a navigation task, a 2D panning task, and a spatial recall task. We recruited 18 participants and conducted a study using a 23-inch touch display that we placed on a table in a horizontal orientation. The experiment asked participants to search items in a 2D space by manipulating the view using one-finger dragging gestures, 2D panning. We had a within subjects experiment with three input conditions. First, we had direct touch input, where the gestures were applied directly to the view. Then we had indirect touch, where the gestures were applied to a separate input surface that had the same size than the view and was displayed on the right side of it. And we had a third input condition, where the separate input surface was scaled down by a factor of 0.5. The 2D space itself was represented by a 12 by 9 grid, which had empty cells in the middle, and across the other cells we distributed a set of 18 graphical items, and for each input condition we created one spatial item configuration. In the navigation task then, the participants had to search a sequence of 8 of these 18 items, and again for each input condition we had one search sequence in a way that they were comparable regarding the search path length and the spatial distribution. And this search was repeated across 8 blocks. That means in the beginning the search was totally random, but during the task the participants could build a mental representation of the item locations. We asked them to maximize for speed in order to prevent really intensive memorization strategies. Here we measured the navigation time as the pure panning time, and the navigation efficiency as the ratio between the actual navigation that occurred and the optimal. Then in the recall task, we asked the participants, after they had been searching, to place these items as accurately as possible into the 2D space by using the keys from the keyboard. We did that in order to avoid unconscious use of motor or kinesthetic memory, and we measured the distance between the original and the recalled item locations. To the results, we did not observe a difference in spatial memory performance between the input conditions. And for the navigation efficiency and time, we first had to consider the learning, because across the blocks there were improvements, and we only considered these blocks where these improvements were not significant anymore. And for the navigation time, we did not observe a difference between input conditions. However, for the navigation efficiency, we observed that the indirect input with the smaller input size outperformed the other two input conditions. This was a little surprising, as more clutching was necessary. So the smaller input size allowed for shorter movements, indicating that clutching is not necessarily a bad thing in this case. Also, we did not observe a time penalty here for this improved efficiency. However, as the task difficulty was not controlled strictly, future work is necessary to back up these observations. We did not observe differences in spatial memory performance, and we don't think that this is due to a ceiling effect, meaning that the task was too easy, because the error rates that we observed were higher than in the related work. To conclude, we have presented experimental work on the effect of touch indirectness on spatial memory performance and navigation performance in a 2D panning task. We did not observe a decreased spatial memory performance for indirect touch input, and we found that reducing the input surface size in the indirect condition improves the navigation efficiency. We think that this might be interesting for the designers of indirect touch input techniques, for instance, in the context of novel multi-surface workspaces, where designers have ample opportunities to vary form factors, mappings, and functions of virtual touchpads. With that, I'd like to thank you, and if there's time, I'm happy to take questions. If not,